All right. Today is the day. I know there's been a long hiatus and I've been very busy. I'm going to get into that here in a second. This is the Deep State Chronicle, 11 February 2020 edition, and this is going to be a basic channel overhaul announcement. I've been covering the Adam and Eve story. I think I've got through the first 3 chapters of that. Yes, I'm smoking marijuana. I'm legal, deal with it. Give everybody a brief introduction of who I am, actually. Talk a little bit about my experience, some of the things I've done, some of the training I have, and these are just basic bullet points on each of these experiences. Of course, as I go through the content of my channel and explore different topics, cover different issues, I will be getting into more and more about things I know and why I know them. First off, my name is Will Gray Eagle. This is a pen name. Actually, it's the name I'm changing my name to legally. That's personal, complicated issues. Senior editor and content producer here at Deep State Chronicle. Entering into early adulthood right out of high school, I spent 5 years in the United States Marine Corps and was honorably discharged in late 2009 in June. Served 2 combat tours in Iraq, and I was in combat in Fallujah, in both Ramadi and Fallujah. Or a reason why I'm smoking this greatness here. 5 IED blast exposures with a pretty serious traumatic brain injury. Some ugly stuff happened over there. Ugly stuff I've done, ugly stuff I've seen. And I have some pretty bad PTSD as a result of it. Well, at least I did. I've mostly dealt with it by now. Still have certain issues. And in the regard of my military service and my veteran status, I do happen to be 90% service connected due to combat related injuries. So, I've done some stuff, I guess you could say, that matters. I have tons of experience in weapons, security, not just in the military realm, but one of the cards I failed to sort of mention in this presentation, actually I'm going to touch on that a little bit, is I did work for G4S and CIS, both of them being security firms or security corporations, private security companies. And that experience was sort of a mixed bag, but ended up being something I decided I did not want to get into. Bureaucracy, politics. I'll be covering a lot of that in other segments, so I won't get into that now. But I've done a ton of, I guess you could say, military stuff, martial stuff involving weapons and security, tons and tons of security. I have quite a bit of leadership under my belt as well, not just from my service in the military, but also some of the things I've done in college, management positions I've held here and there and otherwhere. Go ahead and cover my nuclear, biological, and chemical training here real quick with the 120 hours of that I have. That's kind of pertinent here and relevant in this conversation because I will be covering a lot of the coronavirus, and the coronavirus is a bigger deal than even Tucker Carlson with some of the footage he's been showing. It's heavily edited, it's heavily cut, and it's just not the raw deal. So It's really bad over there. My personal opinion, this is absolutely not just a leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the P4 laboratory. Equivalent nomenclature to that would be biosafety level 4 here in our own US and otherwise Western standards of doing things. This Institute of Virology I would agree with Dr. Francis Boyle, on par with being similar to the level of a facility that is like Fort Detrick, Maryland, where the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases is located at. Army, why do you have such long, terrible acronyms? Anyway, I've also been a company training NCO. That's kind of a big deal because I've done a lot of public speaking. I've done a lot of presentations, and so I'm sort of well versed in this. I was a vehicle crew chief. That basically means that I was in charge of a vehicle for patrols ranging in different spectrums of applications overseas in Iraq. And during the end of my enlistment, the last 6 months, we went to HNS company, headquarters and service company. If you ask anyone who was in the military, what's that? What's HNS company? They'll tell you it's where you go to die. I was the company police sergeant. That is a fancy way of saying that I was the first sergeant's barracks manager. It was kind of an important job. I did have to keep accountability of all the inventory in the barracks, all the supply in the barracks itself, everything from the hygiene supplies and the bedding that was issued to Marines and sailors, and also maintaining a report that was every quarter reviewed by Congress for the purposes of funding. So going back to even very early on in my life as a young adult, I had some pretty serious responsibilities. I got out of the Marine Corps in 2009. Same month next year, after kind of bouncing around a little bit, I had been married recently, just had a baby, and also in around this time, not long after I begin my employment with the Department of Veterans Affairs, I start going through a divorce. I'll be getting into that soon. But what I did with the VA is I worked in environmental management and infection control. That comes with 120 hours of compulsory training to do the work in the above mentioned, as well as quarterly and annual follow-up training that has to be done and is required. There's updates to the training that comes out, different ways of doing things, we adapt to what's present out there and what sort of infection control measures need to be implemented to disinfect hospital beds, hospital rooms, and whole hospital environments to keep pathogens at a level where people aren't experiencing an outbreak like Legionnaire's disease or something to that effect. SNAP training is something like military veterans, active duty military watch us understand what a frago is, or a frag order. It's when you're engaged in one specific plan and you're just well on your way, and you may even be on your way to totally fulfilling and completing your objective or plan, and then suddenly things change. You have to adapt to something new that's being presented to you on the battlefield. And so I liken that term SNAP to more like frago or frag order, where you completely change your plan based on the arrival of new situations or sudden changes, such as the Ebola outbreak in 2014. I had to actually come into work off hours because the training and the briefing that I had to receive regarding this outbreak, once it had come to the United States, was being taken very seriously. And we had to look out for certain things, and we had to be trained in how to utilize a certain level of protective equipment, how to properly disinfect an environment that may have been had a patient who was isolated in a room with Ebola, so on and so forth. I have 7 years of experience in this at the work site. I worked at Bay Pines Veterans Hospital in North St. Petersburg here in Florida. And I've worked in just about every capacity you can think of. One of the wonderful things about Bay Pines is that they have every type of facility you can expect to find at a hospital. It's one of those larger campuses where they have everything under the sun, and they're building more additions to the campus. I've worked in community living center, which is nursing home. I've done the flight deck, which is a psychiatric ward, general care, MICU and ICU. I've worked in the laboratory, which requires its own levels of protection. I know all about what goes on in the laboratory and how seriously that needs to be taken. The position I had at the VA working in environmental management and infection control, one of the highest mobility, you move all around the campus all day long, and highest access positions, with your key basically gaining you access to just about every door in the facility. And the pay was pretty good too. I capped out at the end of my 7 years making close to about $15.25 an hour. There's a reason why I no longer work at the VA. And part of it is what is inspiring my work here on this channel. I'll get into that later on, maybe not even in this episode, probably when I go through my other content protocols. During this time, I was also working towards a degree. I went to a community college. I used vocational rehab, Article 31 or Chapter 31 benefits from the VA. Attended St. Petersburg College. I did this beginning in 2011. And I graduated in May 2016 with a bachelor's in psychology. It was my major course study. I minored in journalism. Something I would need to mention specifically about that is that in my early life, when I was younger, one of the pressuring conversations my do nothing, do no good, abusive father would kind of bring up at the dinner table like it mattered was, what are you going to do with your life? Well, I said I was going to do two things. Or I was interested in two things. I was like, I think I want to join the military. I also think I want to be a reporter. Something that is always interesting to me, even since I was a child, was being that guy who's on TV reporting the news, right? And then, of course, as I got older, started to kind of see what media was really like, especially you should see what my professors, who are old school journalists, like Walter Cronkite era journalists, they're just appalled at the state of media and news broadcasting and the what they regard as the sacred duty, and I as well, sacred duty of informing the public the things of which they need to know. It's a sad state of affairs. And so here we arrive at another inspiration for me beginning to start this channel, which is to do journalism right. And I do take that very seriously, especially with regards to Feng Ben and I know him as Sen Shu Shil, citizen journalists in China covering the coronavirus. That's all I'll say for that for now. I'll cover that more in depth in another segment. MGTOW Jutsu, what is this? Well, after all these terrible relationships and brutal marriage, not getting to see my kids really, um, family law, divorce court, rape nonsense. What everybody needs to know about me is I identify, or I'm with the category of men going their own way. I'm a bachelor for life. Let's just say that I'm a bachelor. And with regards to that content I'm going to be covering, I do have some experience with men's issues, not just with what I've gone through personally, with everything I've been through I mean, those of you who are men, those of you who are divorced with kids and all that, you know, I don't have to explain. But I did actually start the first chapter, and I was the first chapter president of I guess you could call it a men's success and leadership focused workshop. It's being a community college, it's what we would supplement in lieu of having what you might call an actual Greek life or fraternity. And we were Men Achieving Excellence, which acronymized that would be MAX. I did that for my first year. I went through, I think, my third semester before this actually was beginning to be discussed between me and one of my other professors, my world religions professor. Shout out to Dr. Stephen Sinclair. We began to start talking about this and begin organizing this, and we actually launched during the summer semester, which is kind of risky because not many students attend summer semesters. But we did launch on our summer semester, and we got things started. And then in the fall semester, we kind of really took off. We got a 200 member strong membership, which is saying a lot for the Seminole campus being what it is. It's not a huge college campus. Juggling course study, being a quote unquote fraternity president, being employed by the government, working for the VA, having PTSD, not just from childhood trauma, but also the military, going through a rotten divorce, and yes, she's a rotten ex-wife. It all took a toll on me. It literally crushed me. It brought me to my knees. And things just kind of fell apart for me. I don't remember what year, but right around what time I turned 29. Those of you who are well versed in astrology know what the term Saturn Return means. And it's literally right around about the time I turned 29 when, according to astrologers, you would expect this sort of thing to happen. And this has gone on until recently, about now, and I happen to be 32 now. This period of time literally filled with struggles and adversities. It's been a tough road for me, not just from childhood, but adulthood itself would have just rotten, gnarly things to offer me. I'm grateful for it all, though. I really am. Yes, I'm grateful for the chronic homelessness, and I did experience that in every form. It came in for 3 years. For a year, I couch surfed pretty stably, living with my brother, but nothing was mine. I lived on the couch, and I was very, very depressed and kind of just immobile, lethargic, felt sorry for myself. I just couldn't function for almost that whole year, for almost a whole year. It took me, I think, not quite 9, more like 10 or 11 months to get working again. And that didn't even really, it was really unstable. That wouldn't work out for me. I took a huge pay cut because I lost my job at the VA. And getting into that briefly, the reason why I lost my job at the VA is not because of any misconduct on my part. Actually, I blew the whistle on abuse, and I learned very quickly what you get for that. Um, Other segments later on in the near future, now that I have the platform that I do and the technology now to really make good presentations and to come up with good production quality content to cover these experiences objectively like a journalist should. And I'm going to talk quite at length about Suzanne Clunker, former director of Bay Pines VA healthcare system, and her incompetence and the huge toll it has taken on not just me, but many employees at Bay Pines. We're talking, she knew that outright sexual harassment and sexual assault was happening on that campus, carried out by her police chief, the chief of security for the campus, which is a federal agency, a federal police agency. And she just allowed it to go on. This is going to be covered in other segments further on down the road. We'll get into that later. Like I said, I couch surfed like I was saying. Lived with my brother for a year. Got bumped out right before Hurricane Irma hit, actually. And Hurricane Irma hit us here in my region area really hard. We lost power for a week. It was not quite Hurricane Katrina level. There wasn't that magnitude of chaos. People didn't freak out and lose their shit. But there was a whole week for where I was at without power. In other areas, just in my county alone, it took almost the whole month to get power back. And in and around this time, I'm also going through homelessness. There's just, I'll get into that later on, what that's like in terms of how that story correlates to survival and what people can expect. If people do live these things, people do experience these things, I guess you can say. I've rented from bad roommates. I've had just a sort of, for the whole second year, going in and out of Craigslist roommate position to position, like or ad to ad. This is, I'm starting to first encounter drug addicts who are hyper consumptive and start asking for more money than what is agreed to, because they're really just trying to cover their habit and they haven't covered the bills like they should with the money I've already given them. So dealing with power being turned off and utilities being turned off because this person's really irresponsible. I'm dealing with violence and aggressive people. I'm dealing with people who are controlling and just complete shit show. This instability that I went through for that whole year, getting arrested because I actually got into a fight with one of my roommates who attacked me. And because I just so happened to gain the upper hand in the fight and win the fight by beating him up pretty good, the police decided to take me to jail. I ended up spending a year on the street going through all this and sleeping in my hammock and keeping everything in a storage unit and just kind of going back and forth to a storage unit. And even for a brief period of time living in that storage unit until I got kicked out. It was a nightmare and it was an adventure, that year on the street. And then I actually got into a program called HEP, or Homeless Empowerment Program. When I became homeless, I initially reached out to the VA to, do their job and help. And it took a while. because there's a waiting list for veterans, homeless veterans, to receive services. So it took a while, and once I got sitting in front of the social worker, how long have you been on the street? And at this point, I'm like 9 months. I can't take it anymore. And it was like a deployment. It was literally like a deployment, but with not nearly the same magnitude of resources that you would have from a whole government, a whole government's military backing you up with supply chains and things like that. I didn't have the convenience and luxury of a fob as much as a forward operating base is not a luxury. Um, I lived on an island. I lived on an island for 3 of those months that I was out there, and that's something sort of a idea I got because of the second, third, and fourth order of effects that came from all the exposure that I was dealing with, crisis and trauma after another, being on the street. I'm absolutely exposed to the weather. I mean, it's in the summer. There was a lot of midnight storms that would come through, and I had a tarp that I kept over my hammock. But many nights I wouldn't have it over me because these nights were hot, and having the tarp over me would trap the heat under me. So it was just to have whether or not have a roof over me was an executive decision when I lived out on the street. And of course, homelessness comes with drug addiction and alcoholism and just people stealing your stuff, lack of security. I had to be my own first responder out there, not a joke. And I put here Borderlands because that's what it was like. Those of you who are play video games, Xbox, it was like being in Borderlands. It was like dealing with the psychos in Borderlands, having to come across all these drug addicts who were. These are the people who, in a shit hit the fan type of situation, because there's tons of them out there. They're the ones that are gonna come for the stuff that you worked hard for and prepared for and stocked up and stored and supplied. And security is a big issue. I dealt with all of those encounters heartily and ruggedly. It landed me in jail a few times. But there were still losses that came from that. You can't catch them every time. They get wise and they get sneaky. They see you out there and they see that because you're a little more responsible. You actually, instead of going drugs, alcohol, you actually take the resources and money you have and you try to apply it towards building up and having more and eventually getting off the street, which is what I was doing. I ended up having to be on the street for longer than was absolutely necessary because of the conflicts and the struggles that came from dealing with being in a community of homeless people and the plight that is suffered in general in the homeless community. Um, at the end of the day, I was arrested 4 times, charged 5 times, and convicted none. Part of that adversity was also dealing with the state, the court system, learning in many ways that, and the state attorney is not motivated to achieve justice. It is a bureaucratic political position, and his attitude is that he's going to impress you by keeping that conviction rate up high. And the literal attitude, not just in Pinellas County, but in many of the districts and counties throughout Florida, is you prosecute them all and let God sort them out. And that's what all of the attorneys, my defense attorneys that I've dealt with, and I've had a good public defender, several good public defenders actually. I've had a really terrible public pretender who railroaded me. and had to be fired. I had and I had a really good paid for attorney who actually volunteered to represent me pro bono, and I was very blessed to receive that because the charges I was up against on the last run, the Clearwater Police Department was starting to get tired of me slipping through their cracks. Um, they made a move to charge me with something really hard and heavy, and it was trumped up, and they just expected it to stick, and I needed that intervention. And fortunately, Brandon Kolb from the Kolb Law Firm, if you live in Florida, you find yourself in trouble, um, give him a call. I'll say that he's definitely good at what he does. I'll be talking to attorneys and doing interviews with attorneys in various uh, jurisdictions to cover different segments and different content. Get on to my next slide here. We're talking full circle here. Everything does indeed come full circle. This was an awakening for me. All these adversities I faced, all these traumas and struggles. Um, I took it very well going through it all. The military did give me quite a magnitude of resilience, and being surprised by all this and being forced to go through all this, there was literally no way out of it, go out of getting through it all, but to go through it all. Um, the phoenix rises from the ashes. Rebuilding is for the winners. It's failure is your greatest teacher. And I'm literally coming back from a huge magnitude of failure, a huge magnitude of suffering, which is inevitable. But even in spite of the really bad news we're seeing out there, because we're all struggling right now, or most of us are anyway, we have a lot to prepare for in the coming weeks and months ahead. Things are going to get difficult here, I think, here in the United States. Of course, I'm talking about the situation with the pandemic, but not just that, the greater puzzle that fits into, the greater macrocosm picture that fits into. This pandemic with the quote unquote coronavirus is not all we have to worry about, I think. But I still have a positive outlook through and out all of this. This is because things are going to be getting to be as bad as they're going to get. This is really the time where everyone will truly see uh, the players for who they really are and what their motivations really are. And in the end, this is going to be worse for the bad guys. Absolutely worse for the bad guys, because um, we're going to have a whole lot of pissed off, angry, crying babies who are hungry for blood once they realize just what has been done to them and what they're being put through in the midst of it all. And so here we are now. I'm going to begin to discuss these different segments. These will be the segments I go over and begin to do. I'm going to have a listing protocol where I cover the different segments throughout the day, like a actual reporter might expect to do with a regular workday. And so let me explain all these different segments to you, if I may. Florida focus is obviously going to be what is happening specific to the state of Florida, and I want to be even more micro-specific, St. Petersburg, Clearwater, Tampa, Tri-City area. Over the horizon is going to be regarding military and veterans, and the reason why it's called Over the Horizon that is in direct reference to the Over the Horizon Doctrine, United States Naval Doctrine, which is about the capability of being able to strike your enemy from literally over the horizon before they can see you coming. And so that's why I decided to call this specific segment Over the Horizon, which will be, again, dealing with military and veterans issues. Earth Pulse is going to, this segment is going to be where a lot of my coronavirus coverage content is going to be. And because that specifically fits into the Earth changes and just the fact that we're in a crisis now all around the world, not just with this coronavirus pandemic, but what comes after that and what comes in the midst of it. Um, yeah, I'll be getting into more of that as I cover that specific content. Geopolitics, I'll be dipping my toes into that, and then I can, of course, speak on that to quite an extent and length because, um, I mean, I had a secret security clearance. I've done things with diplomats and so on and so forth. I'm well versed in a number of cultures around the world and how that affects our dealings with other nation states. So I'll be getting into that eventually. So we'll call that a to be announced, and those will be special segments that I don't do frequently. Um, like with the impeachment of Trump, that's just something I would not probably be getting too heavily invested in. I would probably make a weekly update segment about things like that if they came into my sphere and scope of awareness. I hit this marijuana. Uh, Wild Boys. This is also going to be another special segment. This is going to be my one of my many field reporting modalities. A lot of the footage you see uh, with this content is going to be done with. I'm a little unprepared, so let me. Right. So, of course, field footage is going to be done. I recently, this is actually really cheap, but handy camera. It's not quite a GoPro, but for the fact that it shoots in 4K panoramic and it's a sturdy field camera that's in the realm of being like a GoPro. I'll go over this. Actually, I think I'll do a review on this Akaso 4K Ultra HD camera. This will be wildlife footage. We'll be going out to the island, doing stuff like that. I also plan on getting a drone. I will be needing donations from content subscribers, and eventually I'll be putting up a paywall. I better bring this up now. I'll be setting up a Patreon page, and we'll have a paywall for even more specific, special content. Just before I really get into that, other field content will obviously be done with my smartphone. I have a Samsung Galaxy. The camera on this phone is actually not bad. Neither is the audio quality. And behind me, I'm not going to go grab it, but I have a Bluetooth headset with a good microphone headset for field interviews and man on the street interviews and things like that. So um, there's investments going to be put into my production quality over time, and I do intend and expect to be getting out into the field quite a bit. I'm going to be going to USF. I'm going to be going to St. Petersburg College. I'm going to be going out to the island and in the waterways, and just be doing a lot of really fun stuff. This is my work now, and so um, that being the third thing in my little trifecta, growing up with an abusive father and then dealing with the authoritarianism of the absolute efficient, perfect socialist environment that is the military. Um, Man, I really hate authority. What can I say? I really just like the idea that I'm working for myself these days and that I'm doing it and I'm doing it well. And so that covers that. Getting into my next segment type or topic. Everything from geopolitics on down is to be announced, because I'm going to be covering the first 3 segments starting tomorrow. I'll have coverage of those 3 segments, and then beginning next week, I will have content for the refrigerator. The refringerator is obviously a play on the word fringe. And that'll be covering the other things that I like to dabble in and play with, which is stuff like the paranormal, UFOs, and cool shit like that. So, if everything goes according to plan, because I'm going to be really, really putting under a microscope my time management going forward, and keeping an agenda and a day planner to manage my segments and keep segments rolling out and content rolling out, so that I can continue to please those of you who are already subscribed to me, and to draw in more subscribers. Obviously, no one wants to watch a channel that has only produced 3 videos in the last 90 days. Please forgive me. I have been very busy. And getting on to the last segment type, it will be a weekly segment, a weekly every Friday segment called MGTOW Jutsu. Jutsu literally being a play on the Japanese word referring to technique or style. And these are going to be workshops covering things like philosophy, the art of war, warrior mentality, warrior attitude, martial skills, preparedness, and military things, and giving kind of projecting my knowledge and my wisdom that comes from all the martial training I have received over the years, not just in the Marine Corps, but also being literally a mercenary, and all the training that came with that. I'll get into that later. Shout out to the S4 Institute, Jay Pace and Rob McDonald, my instructors there, my firearms instructors. Just to give you a quick little taste of what that's like. How would you like to lay on a picnic table and shoot at a target upside down and get really good at that? I thought that was really fun and really cool. Anyway, I do believe this is my last slide. I am going to get to work on outlines and getting ready for, I should have a Florida Focus and Over the Horizon and Earth Pulse segment as early as tomorrow. I don't want to do this in a hurry. I want to do this properly, and expect, of course, the content production quality of the channel to go up over time. And those of you who are subscribed to me now and have waited so long to see and hear from me again, I thank you for hanging in there. Things are going up from here. I haven't been laying in an opium den feeling sorry for myself. I have been working hard, and that's part of the reason why you're seeing a huge jump from me initially producing content on a smartphone with what that comes with, and now I have an actual computer, I have an actual executive suite to work with, and we're getting to work. We're actually producing the content again, and I figured this is a good place to really truly start. So I look forward to producing more content. I look forward to hearing from everyone in the comment section. I do want to engage you, my audience. I want to hear from you. I want to know what you think about the things I'm talking about, especially if you're in St. Petersburg, Clearwater, Tampa region. I want to get a feel for the pulse of what the attitudes of the people immediately around me are. So if you do happen to be in St. Petersburg, Clearwater, Tampa, Florida in general, please subscribe to me. I will be covering a lot of what is going on around here. I am Will Gray Eagle. This was the Deep State Chronicle. Today is February 11th, 2020, and I hope to see all of you again soon. Go ahead and end this now.